The land deals of a prominent San Diego attorney raise some ethical and legal questions. The San Diego City Council approves a big development project in Carmel Valley to the dismay of some residents. And are women ready and able to take on roles in military combat? I'm Tom Fudge, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are investigative reporter Brad Racino of iNewsSource. Hello, Brad.
Hi, Tom.
Allison St. John of KPBS News. Good to see you, Allison.
Good to be here, Tom.
And Gretel Kovac, military reporter for UT San Diego. And welcome to you, Gretel.
Thank you.
Well, Cory Briggs is best known to San Diegans as being one of the leaders of the successful movement to oust Bob Filner from the mayor's office, but he's also been known to city and port officials as an attorney who has filed dozens of environmental suits against the city of San Diego. This week, KPBS partner iNewsSource raised some troubling questions about some land deals Briggs has engaged in. Other questions focus on the fact that his wife has done consulting work for some of the very city projects that were targeted by Briggs's suits. Now, Brad, tell us, first of all, why did you decide to look into Cory Briggs?
Sure. Well, actually, I can't take full credit for that. That would belong to my colleague, Brooke Williams, who last June, actually, contacted me. She's out east and has worked for iNewsSource and actually the UT years ago. And she has a lot of knowledge about San Diego and about its past, and she had a list of people that she thought deserved some looking into. And at the time, we at iNewsSource were working on the Impossible Choice project, and I said, when that's finished, let's do some digging and see what we can find. And September came around, we published that project, and in late September, she was very busy working for the New York Times and said, why don't you poke around on your own? So I did. And I started like we start with every background of every person we look into in land, and started looking at land deals. So we went to the San Diego County Recorder's office and started looking up Briggs's land holdings and his law corporation's holdings. And one of the first things that popped out was his own home here in San Diego. And on that recorded deed, it said Cory Briggs and Saricia Cacciatore, husband and wife. And it's a very unique name. And I, to my knowledge, had never heard that name in San Diego. And for such a prominent person, you'd think that would come up in any of the profiles written about him. So I just did a quick Google search, and one of the first things that came up was that she's an environmental biologist for a consulting company here in San Diego. So that started us on this long journey of 4.5 months or 5 months of reporting, and that led to kind of everything that we've been publishing.
Well, your story has at least a couple of different aspects, and your first story for KPBS focused on the real estate deals which involved liens. What is a lien? Why would an attorney put a lien on someone's house?
Sure. So in California, they're called liens. In other states, they're mortgages. California is a little bit different. Most of the time, they're a mortgage. Other times, they're a guarantee for payment. So if a bank is going to loan you $500,000 to buy your home, they'll put a lien on your house, and they own that house or have title to that house until that money is repaid. Why a law corporation would do this, there's a couple reasons. One is a guarantee for repayment. So if I am your lawyer and I am representing you and you don't have the money to pay me, I will put a lien on your house to guarantee repayment. So that's what a lien is. But why an attorney would file one for that reason. But from what we have found, most of these people, including the $3 million in liens that I'm sure we'll get to in a moment, these were not his clients. These are not people that he's ever represented or taken to court. From what we can find in Bloomberg Law, Westlaw, LexisNexis searches, we cannot connect these people to any lawsuits with Briggs.
Okay, and that's interesting because Cory Briggs said in an open letter on his website, when my clients win in court, sometimes the losers have to pay my fees. Occasionally a losing party cannot make immediate payment and wants to work out a payment arrangement. When that happens, I take a security interest to ensure my fees are paid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the people, we found, I believe it was 11 of these liens from the Briggs Law Corporation scattered throughout 4 different counties. One of the people we did get in touch with was on the receiving end of one of his lawsuits. She ran a dog food company that he took to court for environmental matters, and she lost. And she has a $75,000 lien on her house. So that makes sense. That checks out. But what he didn't address in that letter, and what we have yet to find an explanation of, is what, first of all, $3 million as a retainer that's a pretty hefty sum for an environmental lawyer who is either representing or attacking, or going after someone in a lawsuit. And this lawsuit that relates to these people, we can't find anywhere.
Well, you did talk to some academics and some legal experts about this. What did they have to say?
They were very surprised by this. They did say there are some loopholes that lawyers can jump through as long as they check a lot of boxes for disclosure with their clients, saying they can enter into these things. But they all insisted that they have to be clients. Or if that's not the case, there's something else going on here.
I was interested in your story that the family that had these liens, the $3 million worth of liens, sent a letter to the station responding to your inquiries, saying, you were inquiring and trying to make a link with the end of Bob Filner's career. Now, that is kind of an interesting speculation. But,
yeah, why would she think that?
Have you found any connections at all with that family and that whole news story?
No, and actually we never brought that up with them. We spoke with the son of that family by phone very briefly, and then we spoke to one of those two people in person at their house for about 10 seconds. And we never brought that up. The only time that was brought up was to Briggs himself during our interview when we questioned the timing of those liens. They were executed on August 28th. Filner announced his resignation on August 23rd, and as good reporters do, we looked at the timing and just said, is there anything about Filner that has to do with this? He didn't answer that question, but that's the only time Filner was ever mentioned to anybody.
So maybe that letter was, if anything, to sort of throw you off the track rather than because that is in fact not the motivation.
Well, and Brad, I think it's worth saying that you tried to speak with Cory Briggs about this. You tried to speak with the people who own the homes. None of them would talk to you.
Right. We did sit down with Briggs for an interview, and we had a long list of questions and a stack of documents we wanted to show him. We got to our second question before he shut down the interview and threatened to call the police. So we did get some questions out during the transition from his office to the road, but he did not answer any of those. The one family that we did drive up and see, they wouldn't speak to us at all. The other one, their house, their lights were off and they weren't answering the door, and everyone else we called wouldn't speak to us except for one.
Well, let's move on to the other aspect of your story. You and Brooke Williams also found some possible conflicts of interest involving Cory Briggs and his wife and her place of employment.
Right. She is, or was, for at least 8 years, according to her own LinkedIn profile, an environmental biologist, project manager sometimes on these projects for all different cities and municipalities throughout Southern California for Helix environmental planning. So the city of San Diego has a contract with Helix, the port has a contract with Helix, a lot of places have a contract with Helix. And we found her name listed on as personnel on the port's contract for a whole bunch of projects the port was executing. And then what we did was cross-check Briggs's lawsuits and saw that he has sued multiple times over Helix's work. And then it just came to light on Wednesday when after a PRA request, we put in a Public Records Act request, that the city attorney turned over invoices that showed she worked directly on a project that he has sued over. And to make it even stranger, the city attorney sent a memo to Helix's CEO stating in the memo that they know firsthand that she was also vice president of Briggs Law Corporation while she was working for Helix, while Briggs Law Corporation was suing the city.
So Brad, what does this mean? I mean, the fact that she's working for the city on these projects that he's suing over, what's wrong with that?
Well, it's a huge conflict of interest. If you're playing both sides, that usually needs to be disclosed in a contract, say between the port or the city and Helix, or between her and her employer. And from what we can find from the contracts, this was never disclosed. There's a potential for a lot of inside information to be passed along with these to enact these lawsuits. So according to all the experts we've interviewed, this is a huge problem.
Okay, well, it definitely got the attention of the city attorney. Gretel, do you have anything to say about this subject?
I'm pretty immersed in military matters at this point, so I will defer to the experts here.
I guess I was just wondering whether, in fact, the onus was on Cory Briggs' wife then to disclose it, or was the onus on him to disclose it?
According to the experts, it's on both of them.
Both of them,
yeah.
So they would both be.
Yeah, if you're a lawyer that's suing, there was a case that these lawyers cited. I think it was Rico versus, now I can't remember, where it established that if you have inside information, you have to disclose that in a lawsuit. You have to tell the other side, I have access to this information. Not, again, on the record, not saying that he has inside information, just putting the facts out there in terms of what we know.
And he says they did do what was necessary to avoid conflict of interest, but that's not enough in this situation.
Well, his open letter came out about an hour before we had the proof that she worked directly on these projects he sued, but he said in his letter, I believe, that they took all precautions to avoid these conflicts, and there was nothing unusual about this arrangement.
And Brad, real quick, this is back in court because the city is bringing it to a judge saying, is this legal? Is there a conflict of interest?
No, actually, the city is bringing a motion to court. They brought it yesterday morning, and what they're doing is they're asking a judge to unseal a deposition. And this is in response to our Public Records Act request, and they believe that once this document is unsealed, it'll explain a lot more. We can't say for sure what is in this document, but the city attorney's office feels very strongly that they need to get their hands on this.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Brad Racino of iNewsSource. Well, this week, the San Diego City Council approved a plan for a 24-acre mixed-use development in Carmel Valley called One Paseo. It'll include 600 housing units, buildings up to 9 stories tall, and 1.5 million square feet of floor space between all the homes, shops, and offices. One Paseo was bitterly fought by many in the area who saw it as too dense and urban. But for backers of so-called smart growth, it became a symbol of the kind of urbanism San Diego needs in order to resist the expense and the gas fumes that come with urban sprawl. Well, Allison, let's start by talking about the vote and how it turned out. I'm interested in the politics of this.
Okay, well, it was a pretty dramatic evening down at City Hall. That hearing lasted for about 7 hours. And when the council started to make their comments, Sherry Leitner, who is the council president, took her prerogative to go first. She represents that district, and usually the council president goes last, but she laid into the project. She said that the transportation management plan is a farce. She said that the EIR is fatally flawed, and she proposed that they only approve it if it was substantially reduced, and she actually got Councilwoman Marty Emerald to support her on that, and Myrtle Cole. However, once it got to other members of the City Council, it became obvious that people did not want to continue this, to prolong the agony, if you like, because it's been being prepared for 6 years, and this has been going on for so long that David Alvarez said, look, let's decide this tonight. So he came up with an idea of saying, we will approve this if the developer agrees to have 10% of their houses affordable houses. So that's 600 houses or living units, condos, and 60 of them would have to be affordable.
And that was the compromise that put it over the top?
That was the compromise. It was interesting, you know, the developers scurried around and did math on the backs of envelopes to see if that would pencil out. I don't know if this was all already in the cards or what, but they came back and said, yes, we could do this. So then the vote came down, and Myrtle Cole switched sides, and it was 7-2 with just Sherry Leitner and Marty Emerald opposing. Everybody else approved it.
Well, the chief objection of Carmel Valley residents to the project is the traffic that One Paseo would create. Let's hear from one of them.
The main objection to this site is traffic. You know, they're generating 23,000 trips a day, which requires them to widen streets, to divert traffic through neighborhoods by schools, elementary schools. Kids will have to get to the elementary school, they'll have to walk across 9 lanes of traffic. The issue with traffic is the more development you have, the more traffic you generate. So we feel that by bringing the traffic levels down, they would end up with a smaller, more appropriate project.
Okay, and here's what developer John Kilroy had to say about that.
The mitigation that we're doing, required to do by the city, is about $6 million and 40 intersections that we're improving. 40 intersections in the greater Carmel Valley area. And then we're doing about $3.8 million beyond that at our own election. And what this will have is the most modern traffic signal system in the country. And it's something, by the way, we did a test on this along with Qualcomm, and the city was involved in that, and the city would like to end up doing this throughout the entire city because it's the most advanced transportation management system or traffic flow system.
And that's developer John Kilroy. Now, Allison, this has become One Paseo has become sort of a symbol of smart growth to a lot of people in San Diego. Can you talk about that?
Well, yes, it's that, like you said in the introduction, you know, we do need to grow inside the urban areas because we can't just keep sprawling out. So we have to get denser. But in order to get denser, how do you solve this problem of public transit? And, you know, I think that is the problem. And I have to say that from the point of view of the developer, it's a difficult challenge because he's in a city which is a very car-centric city. So actually, he was not selling this necessarily as a transit-friendly project, although he's agreed to put in a bus that will take people who want to the nearest coaster station in Sorrento Valley. But he has actually had to spend a lot of money on underground parking, thousands of parking spaces, 3,000, more than 3,000 underground parking spaces, all of which cost a lot of money, because he acknowledges this is a car-centric project.
So whenever you're talking about public transportation, there's a lot of agencies in San Diego that usually have a say in this. So Sandag, Caltrans, North County Transit District, how do they fit into this?
Well, what's so interesting about San Diego is that the land use decisions are made by one set of people, that's the cities, and then the transit decisions are made by another, which is Sandag, the San Diego Association of Governments, which actually the cities do sit on. But essentially, the two are two separate processes, political processes. And this is an example of how you can make a land use decision, the city, on its own. By the way, the other cities nearby, Del Mar and Solana Beach, were very unhappy with this decision because of the transit on I-5. But then the people who manage the future transit plans were not involved in this decision. And so, for example, the mayor of Del Mar said, you know, I'm on Sandag and I have not seen any plans in the next 35 years for public transit in the 2050 transit plan to improve this situation.
So they're just going to have to react to this once it's finished?
Well, the theory is it's the chicken and the egg thing, that once you have enough density, people will be crazy enough that they will say, okay, I'll take the bus. And so that you have to really force it until people are willing to take the bus, and then it becomes financially viable. Now, the other argument is that many other cities are putting in public transit with public money. They're putting public investment into public transit. LA, Seattle, a lot of other cities have put in a lot more investment into public transit than San Diego has.
But it looks like here the developer is saying, if we build it, they will come. Transit will come.
He's saying, you know, I'll build it, you know, and I'll give you a shuttle. But essentially, the transit will have to come from somewhere. And no one is saying, okay, we'll extend the trolley. Okay, well, we are going to broaden I-5, but not for a decade or two.
Last question for you, Allison. When you look at what's going to be in One Paseo, is it feasible to think that people who live there will actually shop and work in the same place?
Yes, I think it's feasible that some of the people in those 600 condos may be senior citizens. It fits this model that people talk about of smart growth, whereas the generations get older and the younger working people, they don't want to spend hours of their lives on the freeway or getting to where they want to go. They want to be able to do it all by walking out of their doors, go to the cinema, go to the park. And there is a model for that, but you know, 600 homes is not a lot of homes considering the number of cars that are going to be on those roads.
Well, that's Allison St. John from KPBS News talking about the approval of One Paseo. By this time next year, all jobs in the U.S. military will be open to women, including infantry and special operations positions. In the fall, Marine Corps officials will decide if they think having women in these combat roles is a good idea. If not, they must ask the Pentagon for a waiver. Now, Gretel, what positions in the Marines are currently off limits to women?
Well, just to recap a bit, 20 years ago, the U.S. military opened air combat and warships to women. So we've had women serving as fighter pilots, attack helicopter pilots, and on Navy warships for quite a while now. But back then in 1994, they maintained a restriction on women in direct ground combat jobs. This is the infantry, artillery, tanks, jobs in special operations forces like Army Green Beret and Navy SEAL. So in 2013, the Defense Secretary got rid of that last restriction and said, services, you have 3 years to open all jobs to women so that candidates will be judged on their abilities and not their gender. But he gave them a loophole. He said, you know, as you're researching the best way to integrate women into these formerly all-male units and occupations, if you can convince us with very detailed research about why a certain job or unit should remain closed, then we will consider exceptions. So the services have been doing a lot of research, and the Marine Corps has been doing some very unique research, and some say controversial. So we're all waiting to see what the decision will be and whether or not, in fact, all jobs will open to women.
Well, Gretel, you spent a lot of time at Camp Lejeune, Marine Base in North Carolina, following some women. What did you see there?
Well, not just women. The interesting thing is I was following women and men in mixed gender platoons of infantry, artillery, tanks. What the Marine Corps did was they created an experimental task force, basically a ground combat unit similar to the battalion landing teams that they would deploy at sea on their Marine expeditionary units. And they, instead of having only men in these ground combat units, they trained they sent women to those schools, to train as infantry riflemen, to train as tank crewmen, and then they've assigned them in these mixed gender units. And they just now deployed for 3 months to 29 Palms. They're going to be doing a combat assessment. And there's a parallel army of researchers and scientists, and they've got them hooked up to all these sensors and whatnot. And so they're tracking their combat performance, they're tracking their physical fitness rates, their injury rates, and at the end of the day, they're going to crunch all this data and say, can women successfully be integrated into these all-male units?
Well, as far as you can tell, how's it going? How is morale? How are the women performing?
There are some skeptics who accuse the Marine Corps of setting the women up to fail, of doing their research in bad faith, saying they've been trying to gather ammo for the last 2 years to get an exception and to keep women out. Whether or not that's true, the Marines say that's absolutely not true. What they're finding with this ground combat unit, this task force that they created at Camp Lejeune and that is now at 29 Palms, is that these women and the mixed gender units are performing extremely well. I mean, in some cases they're out shooting, all-male tank crews at Camp Lejeune. So they've been able to quickly and effectively train these women into these ground combat jobs. They're seeing minimal problems with hazing. How applicable this is to real-world conditions is, that's another argument. But so far, it's going very well.
I think there's sort of two ways of looking at it. One is that it's like a equal rights issue, and that women should have the right to be able to go where men go. But the other issue is, if you look at it from the military's perspective, they need more people to be recruiting, to recruit more people, to fill the ranks, as it were. And so you've got to ask yourself from the other perspective, do you think the military is doing enough to make sure that they're not just doubling the population of people they can now recruit from, and perhaps putting women in situations that they're more at risk at because they don't have the same physical attributes that a man does?
Well, there's so many thorny issues in relation to the questions that you're asking. Right now, 15% of the U.S. Armed Forces is female. So we have many women serving in combat support positions with many of these units. Now, one thing that we have to consider is what's called critical mass theory, and that's as long as you have a very small number of people assigned to a group, then they're going to be treated as second-class citizens. And in the case of the military, it raises questions of, will these women be exposed to sexual assault or sexual harassment? Will they not be judged on their merits? Will they be judged for other reasons? So the military, if they're going to make this change, they want to get a critical mass of women assigned to these units, but where are they going to come from? I mean, we only have 15% of the entire armed forces right now is female, and critical mass theory says you need 20 to 30%. So a lot of unknowns going ahead.
Gretel, my dad, God bless him, is still alive, though he served in World War II. One of his favorite stories is being on the coast of England and seeing a German warplane fly overhead, and then seeing a group of English soldiers jump onto a gun emplacement, start firing and shoot down the plane. And my dad and his Navy buddies were hooting and whistling, gave them a big round of applause, and then they found out that these were all women. And they didn't know because they were in uniform. But so my question is, we've seen women in combat in the past. What is the continuing argument that they aren't suited for this kind of work?
There's a lot of opinions. I think what I'm trying to do in my series is sort the facts from a lot of the very emotional opinions about it. But, many frame this issue as a question of civil rights versus combat readiness. And they say, we can't be an equal opportunity military. What's important is that we continue to protect our nation in the most effective manner possible. So on one hand, you have those who say, if you allow women into these units, standards are going to be lower. On the other hand, you have the senior leaders of the U.S. Armed Forces saying, we will be a stronger, more effective military if we allow the best candidate to fill each job, whether man or woman. And that's not what we have right now.
Okay, and based on the order they have until, the Marines have until what time to prove that this shouldn't be the case?
All of the armed forces, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Special Operations Command, they have until October 1st to apply for an exception if they want to. Now, the senior leaders of the Army and even Special Operations Command have been speaking publicly, and it looks like they're not going to even try to fight this. The Marines might, but it remains to be seen.
Okay, well, that wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. Thank you to Brad Racino, Allison St. John, and Gretel Kovac for joining me. A reminder, all of the stories discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Tom Fudge. Thanks for joining us today at the Roundtable.